Welcome. Atheists, agnostics, skeptics, you are all welcome here. At Seattle Atheist Church, we call ourselves an atheist church because you will never hear anything supernatural talked about from the podium. So for today's talk, I need to begin by saying that the views presented in this talk do not represent any official position of the Seattle Atheist Church. In fact, that's always the case. So we have a talk and then it really just serves as a discussion prompt. Today's talk is on self-esteem and taking responsibility, and it's based on the book The Six Pillars of Self-Esteem by Nathaniel Branden. I had originally suggested this be a multi-series talk and also cover the book Taking Responsibility by Nathaniel Branden, but we'll see how it goes today. In fact, for this time for sure, this is only going to be a one-time talk. Jeffrey Canada was born in the South Bronx, and his parents divorced when he was 4. He was raised by his mother with some help by his grandparents, and his mother struggled to do her best for him. She was a good mom, but she was poor. And the world outside their apartment was a world of abandoned houses, crime, violence, and an all-encompassing sense of chaos and disorder. That's what he said about it. He said that as a child, I loved comic books. One of the saddest days of my life, maybe I was in the 4th grade, was the day that I realized Superman wasn't coming to save us. He wasn't coming to save the good people. No one was coming to save us. So Jeffrey Canada grew up and he graduated from Harvard, and then he went on to found the Harlem Children's Zone, which is a nonprofit focused on breaking the intergenerational cycle of poverty, and they do this through education. The Harlem Children's Zone now is a 94-block radius around Harlem in which they track every child from kindergarten through high school and even into college, and get them the academic and social services that they need to thrive. Students in the program get academic support, including tutoring. They also receive 2 healthy meals a day, daily exercise, health and dental care, and after-school enrichment classes, and after-school sports, team sports. So the film Waiting for Superman deals somewhat with Jeffrey Canada's life. And it's been a really long time since I've seen that film. If anyone is interested, that might be a topic for another day. How we deal with breaking the cycle of poverty is outside of the scope of this talk. But the reason that I bring it up is because Jeffrey Canada is a person who represents a person taking responsibility. And when he realized that Superman wasn't coming, he spent the rest of his life living with a purpose and carrying out a plan. He took responsibility for making a difference in his community, and I think he's someone that we can look up to for that reason. Now, Canada requires a lot of self-responsibility from his students and from their families. But valuing responsibility, personal responsibility, does not mean that we can't also create a society where people don't have to go it alone, and where people can get help. Because no one should be without support. We all need a loving family, we all need a healthy community, and a nation which creates opportunities for people. Jeffrey Canada had his mother and his grandparents to help him, and today the Harlem Children's Zone, it actually has an operating budget of $84 million a year, focused on helping children like Jeffrey Canada was as a child. So a few people came up to me, I posted weeks ago that we were going to be doing this talk on Nathaniel Branden, and a few people came up to me and told me that they felt really challenged by the subject. And so I chose to begin with a story about Jeffrey Canada because I wanted to illustrate that a person who takes personal responsibility and who asks others to take personal responsibility for themselves can also be a person who assembles systems of support. Those things are not in conflict. Okay, so the other thing that I think was a concern for people was just an ongoing concern among the members of the Seattle Atheist Church, some of the members, about handling topics of psychology, popular psychology, and that unless solid research supports the claims that are made in various books, that we should be wary of that and we should be, skeptical. And so it wasn't really until yesterday that I started looking for research, scientific research, to back up Nathaniel Brennan's work, which unfortunately I didn't find. It might be that there isn't any, and that might just be because this is all pretty new stuff, like about the last 50 years, and that research will still be forthcoming. But he, of course, did develop his ideas after decades of working with individuals and with groups. And I'm bringing in this topic because it's something I find personally valuable, so I hope that someone else here will get something out of it. So the book we read was called The Six Pillars of Self-Esteem, and some of us got it and read it. Is there anyone here who's read this book? So we got some people got it. That's awesome. And he wrote a lot of books, and the other topic that he's really big on is on responsibility as well. So he linked a person's self-esteem, their self-confidence, and taking responsibility for their own lives all as sort of one piece. So let me share with you 4 humorous examples of people who just won't take responsibility for their own actions. This is from the book Taking Responsibility. These were responses given on accident report forms submitted to the Arizona Safety Association. Coming home, I drove into the wrong house and collided with a tree I don't have. The guy was all over the road. I had to swerve several times before I hit him. I had been shopping for plants all day. On my way home, a hedge sprang up and obscured my vision. An invisible car came out of nowhere and hit my car. A pedestrian went under my car. So, and there's a lot of them, but those are just 4 I selected. So he asked us to consider that this is how some people live their lives. Like, it's just happening to them. And that's called not living consciously. That's called living unconsciously. And sometimes I don't live consciously, right? Sometimes I go to the store and I buy organic vegetables and I get home and I realize they're just powdered donuts. And I hate it when that happens to me. But when I read these books, one of the things that I do is I try to consider if I myself might be using equivalently absurd justifications, excuses to justify my behavior. Because the whole thing about living unconsciously is, you're not aware of the fact that you're doing it. So I personally see a lot of value in living with self-responsibility, and so I'm looking for ways to increase my ability to do it. So what is self-esteem? Where does it come from? And how can I raise it or lower it through my own actions? So in the book, The 6 Practices of Self-Esteem, it gives us 6 practices for raising self-esteem. And that's really what the rest of this talk is going to be about. So self-esteem is the simple belief, the core belief that I deserve to be happy. Brandon believes that our ideas about how happy, successful, desirable, intelligent, everything in our self-concept that we believe we are capable of being is highly influenced by childhood messages that we received. Usually from our parents and also by other people in positions of authority and power in our lives. A big part of his process is asking people to do STEM completion work, to try to uncover unconscious beliefs we have about, who we are, what we deserve, and what we believe might happen if we try to challenge those beliefs. So, you get a sentence STEM prompt, and people are familiar with this, and then you respond as quickly as you can with 10 answers to the question, and sometimes some surprising things turn up. So, message I received from my mother when I was growing up was that, I was naughty. And then later, if mother was wrong, then. If mother was wrong, then. And it's the thing about the STEM completion exercise work is that the power is in doing it. Like, you really can't really understand how it works until you experience it yourself by trying some of the STEM completion. And I think you can find some online if you are interested in them at all. But they personally it helps me think, and sometimes even uncover surprising things when I do the STEM completion work. Now, here are some beliefs that are congruent with having high self-esteem. I have a right to exist. And before you think, well, that's just silly because doesn't everybody think they have a right to exist? One would wonder if some people who have, certain addictions or self-destructive behaviors, certain tendencies to that are actually violate their own right to exist. I have a right to treat my own needs as important. I am not here to live up to someone else's expectations. My own self-expectations matter the most to me. I am lovable. People should deal with me fairly. So all of those kinds of ideas, and he has pages of them, belong to a greater, I deserve to be happy, core self-esteem. If you had core self-esteem, you would also have these other values. So here are some practices for nurturing self-esteem. So the practice of living consciously, of self-acceptance, of self-responsibility, of self-assertiveness, purposefulness, and integrity. Living consciously means engaging one's mind at a more active level, reaching out toward facts rather than withdrawing from them, being willing to admit when I'm wrong about things and to correct my mistakes. And most importantly, I need to work out for myself what I believe. Living with self-acceptance. So the self-acceptance piece is a big one for me. I have a very close friend who is a Jungian psychologist and does a lot of work on shadow, working with embracing your shadow. And the idea that you can't change anything that you don't acknowledge. So I can't change a behavior that I don't acknowledge having, and I must first accept that I have behaved selfishly if I want to endeavor to become less selfish. I must first accept where I have been irresponsible as a first step in becoming a more responsible person. And this is nothing more than dealing with reality. We can't change what we can't acknowledge. Self-responsibility. If I realize that my actions have been incongruent with what I purport to believe, then I need to change my actions. There are a lot of areas of responsibility in which I need to align my actions with my belief. And so kind of what's nice is that in the chapter, he breaks down all these 45 different areas of your life, and there could be even more, where we have to, we're responsible for creating our own experience, right? So I am responsible for how I spend my time. I am responsible for the people with whom I choose to surround myself. I am responsible for the quality of work I produce. And I am responsible for how I interact with others. Those are just a few examples of ones that I pulled out of I'm responsible for that. And when I switch it up, I switch up my experience of my life and increase my overall satisfaction with my life. Self-assertiveness. This means being willing to stand up for oneself. Now, I loved it when I mentioned to a fellow atheist, feel free to disagree. And she said, oh, I am always free to disagree. So I have that choice. That's self-assertiveness. Self-assertiveness is making an effort, if need be, to confront rather than evade whatever needs to be said or done. Now, we try to be diplomatic. Some of us do, some of us don't. But what we don't do is slink away in silence when there's something where we need to stand up for ourselves or stand up for something we believe in. So that's the practice of self-assertiveness. It requires courage. And then there was a little bit in reading some criticism of Brandon's work. I found that there are critics who point out that that's a very modern American position, to care so much about our own desires, the needs of the individual versus the needs of the group. And it can be taken too far. But it can be taken, it can also not be taken far enough. Like, part of the process for me of becoming an adult was realizing at some point, this is my life. Like, if I don't articulate what I believe and live the life that I want to lead, then, you know, my life will pass me by, and whose fault was it? It was my own. So I am responsible for how self-assertive I am, and I am responsible for crafting my own message. Living with purposefulness. Purposefulness involves three things. Focusing, first formulating my goals, which are consistent with my beliefs, and identifying the steps to achieve them. Then monitoring my actions to make sure that my actions are matching whatever I identified as necessary steps I needed to reach my goals. Okay, so living with purposefulness. And then I, you know, some people say they feel like they're not sure they know what their purpose in life is, and things that we can discuss there. Integrity. This is simply living up to the standards that we set for ourselves. And it does presuppose that a person has some articulated standards, right? I live with integrity, and there have been times when, you know, I think everyone, but I'll just go first and say, you know, I have fallen short of some of my own standards, but being mindful and trying not to violate our own standards. If we do these things, we can increase our self-esteem. Okay, so then the other thing here is that I think some of the criticisms about self-esteem as an idea in psychology is that I read through some of the articles and whatever, and they really didn't have anything to do with what Brandon is doing, okay? Because self-esteem is not pseudo-self-esteem. It's not pretending to have a confidence that one doesn't feel. You can't get self-esteem by making affirmations or something. It's all about what you do, you know, what you do. So it's not a denial of reality, rather it's the exact opposite. And then it is the self-judgment that we arrive at based on our own actions. Someone asked me when I was preparing this talk, well, what happens if you have high standards, you have lofty goals, you've worked incredibly hard, and you've tried again and again and again, and you still failed? Doesn't that damage your self-esteem? Well, Nathaniel Branden had this to say on this. He said, it is a matter of asking yourself, what is within my direct volitional control? And if it isn't something that you had direct volitional control over, it might be devastating, it might cause you to doubt your efficacy, but it shouldn't damage your internal compass that says, still, I deserve, you know, to try again. It shouldn't damage the desire, the belief that you should be happy, can be happy, and successful, and valued. All right, so now I'd like to spend the rest of the time having a discussion about the topic of self-esteem. And and how, we talk a lot here about a lot of the things that are formed in childhood, but I think one of the reasons I like this work so much is whatever happened in childhood, it kind of gives us a path, like, well, what now? What now? Or whatever message we received in childhood, what can I do now to improve my life? Okay, so I want to remind everyone that today we have to be out of here by 1 o'clock, and I want to do my standard closing, which is that atheists believe in good because good works in non-mysterious ways.